Atheists Talk on KTNF AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. We appreciate you tuning in and streaming this morning. Today is Sunday, November 3rd, 2019. I'm your host, Stephanie Zavan, and my guest today is Alix Jules. Maddie Love and David Norton are in the studio with me this morning as well. During this live show, we welcome your phone calls to 952-946-6205, emails to radio@minnesotaatheists.org, or questions on Twitter directed to Atheists Talk. Once upon a time, we thought artificial intelligence would be less racist than people. After all, machines are objective, right? And then we started teaching them how to think and made some discoveries of our own. So when racism permeates our society and our IT infrastructure, how do we teach machines to do better than we do? This morning, we're talking with Alix Jules about the point where technology, cognitive sciences, and sociology collide. Good morning, Alix, David, and Maddie. Welcome to Atheists Talk.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
So, Alix, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, what are we really talking about? Because I think people have some wildly varying conceptions of that.
Well, we're actually using artificial intelligence today. What AI is machines that are learning to respond. And so we have algorithms and big, massive data sets that we're training those data sets on, and they create decision trees. And based on those decision trees, they're responding. And with a lot of those responses, they're making predictions, statistical predictions on what might best suit or be the best response for either a situation, behavior, and or a question. And so probably the easiest way for most listeners to think about it is a chatbot. So you get online and you want to have a conversation with customer service and you ask a question. Well, the question might sound like questions that the chatbot has several responses on. It may analyze tone, sentiment, the actual content of the question, and then it'll come back with, hey, these are the 5 best responses for this particular question, but based on what I also know or infer from what you're asking, predictably or statistically, this is probably the best response. Here you go. And then beyond that, it might make some additional statistical inferences on what you might be interested in. So that's a good example of what AI is at a really base fundamental level. It is algorithms that are learning and responding. It can also be applied to other senses. So you can ask questions, but you can also use statistical sampling for vision, which is, I think Google has a wonderful vision API. Just about everyone has a very good and evolving visual API that gets to, take a look at people and statistically sample face and characteristics, et cetera, and say, hey, this is what this is who this person might be based on a certain error rate, and then it comes back and say, I think this is the person you're looking for, or I'll do some level of matching, et cetera. So those are the two areas of AI that people tend to look at, and they're in the mainstream today.
All right. So when we're looking at like Facebook, and Facebook is asking us if we want to tag somebody's picture, or it even is like serving up ads that are just a little creepily close to things that we've talked about or shopped on, or whatever, we're dealing with artificial intelligence.
Already, yes. Pandora's box was open a long time ago.
Okay. And since I'm bringing you on the radio to talk about this, what is your background in these issues?
My background, I actually work as a strategy consultant for one of the larger companies that happens to do AI and cognitive computing. I'm a strategy consultant for the worldwide cloud and data platform for IBM.
All right. And, I introduced this as saying that we used to have a pretty rosy outlook on AI and racism. but it's always worth, I think, talking about who we is. And really, I'm talking about popular culture, so science fiction writers and futurists. And these aren't necessarily people deeply involved in developing technology. Was there a similar optimism in IT?
I think that yes, it is, and unfortunately, the idea of being colorblind that we see in popular culture permeates everywhere. So, looking at AI systems or learning algorithms or the systems that sell themselves that create these systems, and I'm talking about the developers, et cetera, we tend to look at diversity and not necessarily inclusion. So, the biases that we see out in the wild tend to trickle into those systems, those people, et cetera. So even when we start looking at, training the data sets on, hey, it should be more inclusive, not just diverse. Some of the questions that we're asking, if you take a look at the people that are developing that, they don't have the backgrounds that should be asking for, real inclusion. So they're not asking questions on racial discrimination, gender bias, neurodivergent differences, etc. And same thing with vision and accessibility. We're not asking those questions because the people that are at the table don't know to ask those questions.
How inclusive would you characterize not just IT as a field or as an industry, but specifically the people working on things like artificial intelligence?
It's not. I mean, if I were to answer the question directly, it's not. I mean, IT as a whole has not been very inclusive and or diverse. Most companies, we tend to see I think it's every year we get the technology diversity report, and everyone's missing their numbers. They always have. So Apple, Google, Facebook, etc. All of the major players continuously miss their numbers, and so and there's a question there as well. Is like when we talk about the digital divide, are we doing enough as a society to focus on training and closing the education gap that's going to onboard more diverse candidates into these companies? So if we're not doing that, we're not addressing that, then you almost expect to see what you see at the development table, at the management table, and also in the councils that are beginning to talk about these issues. So it permeates and is almost somewhat exacerbated because of the high entry point that exists for getting into these positions. So you do have to go through some level of training. Fortunately, there's been enough controversy, conversation, question at some of these areas where at some of these companies where they're beginning to quote unquote lower their standards. It's not really lowering their standards. It's we don't have enough people to come in and fill a lot of these jobs. And so, removing some of those barriers is going to help fix some of that. But one of the added benefits is if you remove that barrier, that gives other marginalized groups the ability to jump in and possibly catch one of those brass rings. It's not really very concerted, and we continue to have events at South by Southwest and other forums. Google has a wonderful sandbox program where they try and have conversations with diverse candidates and, hey, this is what our companies look like. Same thing with IBM and Microsoft, but they're relatively new and they're relatively immature. So for an industry that I've been in the industry for a little bit over 25 years, and I grew up in it, and I have been the only person at the table in my department, and sometimes in my division, the only person of color, sometimes the only male presenting person of color, for almost 15 years, right? So 15 years, I was the only one at the table. And then sitting across from our customers, outside of the federal government, where some of that is mandated, you have to pay attention to these groups. Outside of that, you won't see a lot of Black and brown IT folk making the big decisions.
So I'm curious, Alix, when you're talking about these companies are going out and looking for people, what are they?
I can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maddie was asking when some of these companies are going out looking for people.
What's their background that they're looking for?
Yeah, what are they looking for? And I think this kind of gets to our question as a whole. How are they training themselves to look for people in ways that they're not finding diversity and inclusion?
They're not training themselves, which is kind of the problem. Until and unless there is big, massive outcries from the public or from some of the academic institutions, et cetera, that say you have a problem, they're not focusing on it. There's also another problem that we're beginning to see, which is the filtering. We're leveraging AI for the applicant tracking systems, and we're getting very, quote unquote, smart about how we selectively apply those algorithms to who might be the best candidates.
I will come back to that when we get back from commercial. So please stay with us through the break, and we will return to Atheists Talk with our guest, Alix Jules. I'm Stephanie Zavan, and you're listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Hi, Gregory Rich, founder and chief at Habitation Furnishing and Design, and now I'd like to invite you to kill your Sunday evenings with me right here on AM 950 with Drink in the Style. It's a 1-hour-long conversation about interior design, art, architecture, and pretty much anything else, visual and aesthetic, all while enjoying some booze handcrafted by our friends at Gianni's Steakhouse in downtown Wayzata. Can you think of a better way to spend Sunday evenings? Drink in the Style, Sundays, 5 p.m.
If you listen to AM 950 regularly, you have heard about the work Better Futures Minnesota does and the services they offer. Join AM 950 Radio for an important breakfast dialogue and fundraiser to support them and their reintegration support services. This transformational breakfast is on Tuesday, November 5th at the Town and Country Club in St. Paul from 7 a.m. to 8:30. This fundraiser will celebrate Better Futures Minnesota's impact and invites allies like you to join them in continuing to build a movement to end the revolving door of Minnesota prisons and help men build a better life for themselves, their families, and their communities. Guest speaker Dr. Tommy Watson will lead an inspiring conversation about how we can work together to make real social and environmental impact by turning transitions into triumphs. Please consider supporting Better Futures Minnesota individually with a donation of your choice or at the gold, bronze, or silver level for the breakfast. Go to am950radio.com and click on the link to register, or go to eventbrite.com and search for Better Futures Minnesota.
Hi, my name is Mickey McCabe, and I'm the owner of Cucumbers Restaurant at 75th and France and Edina. If you've never been to Cucumbers, it's a buffet-style restaurant with a huge variety of salads, homemade soups, bakery items, and hot entrees that change daily and nightly, plus our always fresh fruit and delicious ice cream. We're open for lunch and dinner, but Sunday brunch is my favorite time at Cucumbers. With scrambled eggs, waffles, French toast, bacon, sausage, baked ham, chicken fajitas, brunch potatoes, warm gooey cinnamon rolls, and many other items to choose from, it's no wonder why Cucumbers has always been a popular Sunday destination. So whether you're looking to skip Mass, someplace to go after Mass, or just great food to maintain your Mass, Cucumbers is the answer to your prayers. Bring in your church bulletin or Minnesota Atheist newsletter and receive a $2 discount off the buffet price. Cucumbers, one heavenly buffet at 75th and France in Edina.
Don't believe in God? Join the club. Humanists, atheists, and freethinkers have joined the American Humanist Association since 1941 to advocate for progressive values and equality for non-theists in America. Located in Washington, D.C., the American Humanist Association lobbies Congress on humanist issues, protects the rights of atheists in the courts, and supports more than 140 local chapters. Visit us at AmericanHumanist.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter to learn how you can join the club today.
Welcome back to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is Atheists Talk, and I'm your host, Stephanie Zavan. Join us after the show today at Cucumber's Restaurant for brunch. Bring a copy of the Atheist Weekly email for your discount and ask to be seated with Minnesota atheists. This is a live show, and we welcome questions at 952-946-6205, emailed to radio@minnesotaatheists.org, or on Twitter or Facebook. Today's guest is Alix Jules. Welcome back, Alix.
Thank you.
So as we were going to break, you were bringing up the fact that we are now working to automate the hiring process, kind of in general, but the topic was specifically how that affects who is working on AI. So this is really a recursive problem at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So we thought that introducing artificial intelligence and smart analytics would help remove some of the biases in the hiring practices. But turns out that when you have such a large volume of people applying for jobs, that it might make sense to leverage artificial intelligence to do some of the sorting and some of the ranking. The problem is when we look at what good looks like, the definition of good has some of those biases. And so therefore, we're looking for people that look like what we think good is without necessarily looking at what else we might want to introduce. And so if historically good looked like, let's say, it has been historically white men in many of these positions, we're looking for some of the same patterns. So although we're trying not to discriminate on names, we're looking for people with experiences that require a lot of access and or capital to get, versus a minority group or black man, black woman, et cetera, that may want to get the same jobs, but they may never surface. And
I think the most striking example of that I saw recently in the news, and I'm not sure it was connected to AI, but just the kinds of hiring processes that we sometimes use, was people looking for candidates who had experience in the same kind of elite sports that they did. So sports that are only played basically by rich kids.
Yes.
So that's the kind of not work-related stuff that we're talking about that falls under culture fit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And now you're applying those same biases to a mass numbers. So instead of the 10 or 15 that hiring managers could look at and potentially examine themselves, you may get 1,000 or several hundred. And so people are very much incentivized to use these systems, but these systems have those systematic and systemic biases that are just being applied electronically.
All right. So let's take this outside the realm of just hiring. Well, actually, first, before we move on, what should we really be looking for when we are wanting to hire people into this? We talk about diversity and inclusion, but David pointed out to me over the break, we don't necessarily define those so much as make them buzzwords.
Well, I think that needs to be a cultural discussion that happens in the workplace. What do we want our workplace to look like? And I know that it evokes difficult conversations around quota systems, et cetera. And we like to believe things are equal, but when we're looking at equity, really trying to focus on bringing in the candidates that maybe look like the market that you're trying to target, because statistically, again, we do know that diversity in technology helps with innovation, et cetera. So removing some of the buzzwords, maybe allow for less perfect candidates or resumes, not candidates, less perfect resumes to actually surface, because maybe this is the first time one of those students may come from a lower level school in technology, and maybe not the Harvard, MITs, et cetera, but just as good. So it has to be a cultural decision to do it.
All right. So let's move on to another bit of recent news. The thing that really pushed me to do this as a show, there was just a bunch of reporting about the fact that United Health was using an algorithm to decide who got what kind of care. And when we say what kind of care, we're talking about high technology care versus low technology care, intensive treatment versus less intensive treatment, that sort of thing. And when they audited that, when the New York State Department of Health audited that, they discovered that algorithm was assigning Black people a lower quality and aggressiveness of care. Is this the kind of thing that we're looking at when we're talking about racism?
Yeah. And so this winds up being a consequence of not being inclusive. So this wasn't something that was planned in. This is just a consequence of, and it is a consequence of not looking at the problem holistically or more broadly. And so in the United Health care instance, what they were doing was looking at income. They were looking at previous health care issues, et cetera, and they were using those to make statistical decisions. However, when you take a look at the U.S. as just a number, and look at the demographics, well, you're going to have statistically less numbers of Black and brown that are going into the system because of the cost of healthcare, et cetera, those particular barriers. So you don't have a lot of data sets to train the systems on. And so as a result, you might see some income issues that are tied to class as a primary factor or primary variable impact Black and brown people significantly more. So yeah, you're beginning to see that. Same thing when we talk about facial recognition in policing, kind of have the same problem, where the number of data sets or the quality of the data sets that are used in training these systems aren't really equity-based. They're not really good in general. And so when you say, hey, this facial recognition software has an error rate of less than 95%, which isn't bad, right? So the number of false positives is really good. And then when you start breaking those down, when it comes to women, when it comes to minorities, you wind up seeing people with darker skin, et cetera. The error rates are closer to 40-50%.
All right, we need to go to break. We'll return to that when we come back. Please stay with us through the break, and we'll return to Atheists Talk with our guest Alix Jules. This is Stephanie Zavan, and you're listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
I'm Candy Brothel, publisher of the Twin Cities edition of Natural Awakenings magazine and host of Green Tea Conversations, a news show for people who are on a journey to take responsibility for their health and play a more active role in their family's well-being. Join me every Sunday at 10 a.m. as I interview local experts who share the latest in natural holistic approaches in a fun and informative way. So grab a cup of tea and join the conversation as we awaken to natural health. Visit us at naturaltwincities.com.
Marijuana legalization might not mean a lot to you professionally, but it may to your clients and employees, bankers and investors, property owners and landlords. Minnesota Lawyer has got your back with the CanCon Business Symposium on Wednesday, November 6th at the Depot, Minneapolis. Denver-based researcher the Marijuana Policy Group will present data on the economic impact legislation has had in Colorado and how that might translate to Minnesota. You'll hear from professionals in other states that legalized marijuana about what's at stake for you. Human resources professionals professionals can learn about the effects on employees and how the hiring process could change. Attorneys will learn how to protect their clients. Commercial real estate brokers and agents will hear about investment opportunities from an expert panel. Speakers include Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, Speaker of the House Ryan Winkler, and Senators Melissa Franzen, Jeff Hayden, and Scott Johnson, as well as several Minnesota business leaders. Learn strategies that work at the CanCon Business Symposium on Wednesday, November 6th at the Depot, Minneapolis. Register now at canconmn.com.
Atheists, secular humanists, and free thinkers. Here you are listening to the Minnesota Atheists Talk radio show, Atheists Talk. We hope you are enjoying it. If having a frankly atheist perspective on the radio waves appeals to you, please consider making a contribution to our radio fund. Our contract came up for renewal, and we need your help if you want the program to stay on the air. That will make sure that you can continue to have opportunities to hear interesting speakers with non-religious perspectives, and you can call up and ask them questions too. Get the details on our website at minnesotaatheists.org, where you will find buttons to make it easy to make a secure donation through PayPal. Or, if you have a business and would like to reach an intelligent, progressive audience, please contact us through our website. That's minnesotaatheists.org. Or call us at 612-588-7031. If you are interested in us, we are interested in you.
Don't believe in God? Join the club. Humanists, atheists, and freethinkers have joined the American Humanist Association since 1941 to advocate for progressive values and equality for non-theists in America. Located in Washington, D.C., the American Humanist Association lobbies Congress on humanist issues, protects the rights of atheists in the courts, and supports more than 140 local chapters. Visit us at AmericanHumanist.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter to learn how you can join the club today.
With your AM 950 weather, I'm Hunter Haas. Today, mostly cloudy with a high near 48. Tonight, chance of showers, cloudy with a low around 33. And Monday, cloudy with a high near 40.
Save at least $1,270 on a new furnace during Standard Heating and Air Conditioning's Don't Wait for Winter sale. Because winter won't wait, and neither will these savings. Learn more about this limited-time deal at StandardHeatingDeals.com. Standard Heating. Comfort you deserve.
Welcome back to Atheists Talk on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. I'm your host, Stephanie Zavan. Atheists Talk is an unusual show. Very few places in the U.S. can someone randomly turn on commercial radio and hear a bunch of atheists talking about topics that interest them. Much of the work to keep us on the air is done by a dedicated group of volunteers, but we need your help too. Today, we'd like to thank in particular Steve and Shirley for their recent donation. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation to our radio fund, please visit minnesotaatheists.org or search for Atheists Talk on Patreon and sign up for exclusive content. I mean, if this is what we're talking about in the clear, you just imagine what our extras are like. Atheists... Maddie's heard some of them.
I'm just thinking it's a little more colorful sometimes.
Yes. Atheists Talk is produced with funding from Minnesota Atheists, American Atheists, and Cucumbers Restaurant. If you'd like to advertise on this program, please contact us at radio@minnesotaatheists.org. Our music is composed by member Brent Michael Davids and used with permission. Opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the speakers. You can find Minnesota Atheists public policy positions at minnesotaatheists.org. Consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists if you're not already. Support our work and help steer our future direction. If you have a question or comment on today's show, please call us at 952-946-6205, email us to radio@minnesotaatheists.org, or find Atheists Talk on Twitter or Facebook. Alix Jules is talking with us this morning about what we're teaching artificial intelligences about race. So before we went to commercial, we were talking about basically how we are
like how we have racism built into algorithms based on like where people that your data set itself is corrupted.
Yeah, we were talking about really about how the questions that we ask affect the answers that we get, which should be obvious, but Okay. I guess not always. That's why we're doing the show. And we were talking a bit about the data that we have. You were talking about specifically data used in the criminal justice system, I think. What kinds of problems do we have in that data?
So we actually have two really big ones. The first one is the false positives. So when people go out there, or when companies go out there and sell their facial recognition software, they're saying that, hey, my facial recognition software has extremely low error rates, and that is based on the assumption of the aggregate, right? So if I look at white men, for instance, there is, because of the training sets and the training data that went in, and because of physics, it is much easier to get accuracy rates really high with white men. Then when we take a look at people with much darker skin and women, the numbers aren't as good. I mean, I think Joy Bolamwini actually did a paper a few years ago, back in 2017 through 2018, where she went looking at what the error rates were and did a deep dive into those data sets. And the numbers for Black and brown people, the accuracy rates were closer to anywhere between 50 and 60%. And so when you're looking at such a high error rate and false positive for people that are being policed or over-policed by now machinery, you can't accept those numbers. And yet we're potentially convicting people based on placing them where they shouldn't be, or putting burdens on them to prove that they weren't where they are now claimed to be. So that was number one. So what's feeding the data sets is wrong. The training on the data sets is wrong. But also, there's not really any legislation or an ability for people to opt out. We're not talking about active consent when you're going down there. And also, let's take a look at, Times Square. So if we started using facial recognition software everywhere, as we know that NYPD had instituted a program where they were using it for profiling, people aren't aware that they're being monitored in many of these situations. So people don't have the ability to consent or potentially opt out. And then on top of that, there's no legislation in the US anyway that kind of dictates what those rules need to be. In the EU, they are spending a little bit more time talking about it. We have, the whole reason everyone is still accepting cookies was because of a big law in the big legal change in the European Union, the GDPR, which addresses privacy of their digital citizens. So, you have this, and there's some financial teeth associated with those as well. Up to $20 million, big percentage of your revenue. If there are data breaches, et cetera, you have to give people the option and the ability to opt out of what you do with their data. So one is the bad training, but then there's no legislation on top of what we do with the bad systems.
Well, and facial recognition obviously is not the only part of the criminal justice system this affects. I think there was something a few years ago about sentencing guidelines where there was an attempt to turn it over to an algorithm that would predict recidivism. And it ended up predicting that that Black and brown people would be rearrested. But that doesn't, even though that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being arrested because they're committing more crimes.
Yeah, correct. This is where people will say, hey, this is a fact, but without the context, the statistics lie, right? You can twist it into anything. So yes, you may say that recidivism is high in those communities, but sociologically speaking, why is that the case? And we have decades of research that shows that it's over-policing. It is unfair. It is opportunity, the lack of opportunity. It is applying unfair sentencing guidelines to those communities, et cetera. So, again, this is one of those, all you're doing is automating the bad policy. All you're doing is institutionalizing, or technically leveraging institutionalized racism and just automating it.
What kind of pushback are we seeing? Are we still trying to treat machines like they are more objective than we are?
We do know that the problem exists. And there are various researchers who are working at addressing it. I mentioned Joy Bulamwini and the MIT lab. There's another researcher, Francesca Rossi at IBM, who's also working on that. But as it begins to bubble up and these issues begin to surface, academics are beginning to focus on it. The companies, not so much yet. It's going to take significantly more legal pressure for companies like Facebook to respond and do something and change policy. And again, it's going to take people looking at Americans or people in the U.S. as digital systems or digital citizens. And we haven't made that shift yet. We're significantly behind in this conversation.
So part of the problem here is profit motive without any controls against it. Is that an issue that we have in this society?
It's almost as if it wasn't a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That was gold.
How aware are, I'm thinking like in my own field in healthcare. I was educating some folks on like trans and issues, and somebody was like, I've never heard some of these terms before. I'm like, you're a vice president of a major healthcare corporation. When it comes to like this topic, how aware are like the people at the top of the company who can make like big unilateral decisions?
How aware are they? They are aware, but remember, they are subject to stakeholder pressure, right? So they're still responding to, is this going to impact financially the company? And so that's still, that profit motive is always going to be in the middle of this without any legislation. But they're aware. They're very aware.
That's what I was afraid of.
They're just not writing it in their proposals.
Correct. Now, as some of them, IBM happens to be one of, are paying attention to, corporate responsibility, social responsibility. They are beginning to focus on what sustainability means. And when you look at the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, one of those goals is racial justice, et cetera. But even those councils, they're still working on trying to figure out what AI means. Again, Pandora was let out the box a while ago. We are working in and with automation all around us, and the decision making is already being automated for us. So it's one of those. It's trying to. This is the conversation that we should have had 30 years ago. Because this was all kind of predicted. We've Asimov has talked about it, Kurzweil has talked about it, et cetera. So we saw this coming. And it still snuck up on us.
Almost like we didn't care.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, we should have addressed this 30 years ago, but we still had the main obstacle of the racism inherent in society 30 years ago. Then we're still fighting that.
Correct, and then you have the denialism that goes with that.
Right.
We have to get past the discomfort.
And allowing people to even come to the table to put people in a position to make a decision.
Yeah. I'm and we need to go to commercials soon, so I'm not sure how much we'll be able to get into this. But, I'm thinking about, frankly, there is an industry that looks at this data and writes pieces, sometimes even for scientific journals, that basically say, but what if these people are worse? What if these people are not as qualified? What if these people are more criminal? What if? And it literally is. It's an industry. Alix, when we come back, I would really like to talk about how that affects this.
Okay.
So please stay with us through the break, and we'll return to Atheist Talk with our guest, Alix Jules. I'm Stephanie Zavan. You're listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
If you're struggling with what to give someone for a holiday, birthday, welcome gift, or to say thank you, try an affordable, easy, and unique gift, a You Betcha box. What are they? Curated Minnesota gift boxes that include delicious Minnesota-made gourmet goodies. And with a name like You Betcha, you know it's local. You Betcha boxes are a real-world example of what we can achieve when we support and nurture one another. Featuring a variety of fun Minnesota-themed options, there is sure to be something for everyone. Every box also includes the artisan maker profiles. Your gift recipient will enjoy reading about these amazing award-winning products and the interesting stories of the Minnesotans behind them. You Betcha boxes are perfect for family and friends across the country and make great business gifts that will show your employees, coworkers, and clients your appreciation. Just go to youbetchabox.com and browse through the wide variety of local Minnesota-made gift boxes. Shipping is always included in the price. There is sure to be something that will leave a lasting impression. That's youbetchabox.com.
Hi, my name is Mickey McCabe. I'm the owner of Cucumbers Restaurant at 75th and France in Edina. Many who have dined at Cucumbers are of the opinion that our buffet has evolved from an older, more country-style buffet. They look at our 50-foot salad bar and can imagine a smaller ancestor with far fewer choices. An ancestor that didn't offer as many hot selections or have a bakery with fresh-baked muffins and breads. Didn't offer homemade soups and lacked the fresh fruit and ice cream bar that Cucumbers customers have grown to love. But some will say, where are the transitional buffets? In addition, they look at everything that we offer and say that Cucumbers is irreducibly complex. If you were to remove just one of our offerings, the entire buffet wouldn't function. Well, I would like to think that Cucumbers was intelligently designed, since I helped design it. But at the same time, it truly is an evolutionary step up the buffet ladder. And as always, if you bring in your Atheist newsletter or church bulletin, you will receive a $2 discount off the buffet price. Cucumbers, one heavenly buffet at 75th and France in Edina.
I've never met another atheist.
Sure you have. Non-believers make up 12% of the population.
Then where are they?
You can meet us at book clubs, pub crawls, discussion groups, movie nights, monthly meetings.
Okay, I get it. How am I going to keep track of all this?
Easy. Sign up for Minnesota Atheist Meetup Group and subscribe to AWE.
What's a meetup group?
Meetup is an online networking site that helps people build communities. We have over 700 members with at least 2 events every week.
And what is AWE?
It stands for Atheist Weekly Email. It comes out every Friday and lists everything that's going on.
How do I sign up?
Go to the Minnesota Atheists website, minnesotaatheists.org. On the left, click on the words Get Awe-Inspired.
And for the meetup?
Look for the red meetup badge on the right. Above it are the words, click here to check out the meetup group.
I'm sold. Minnesota Atheists, Meetup, and AWE. What's that website again?
minnesotaatheists.org.
Welcome back to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is Atheists Talk, and I'm your host, Stephanie Zavan. Today's guest is Alix Jules, talking with us about racism and artificial intelligence. Welcome back, Alix. So, before we went to commercial, I mentioned that I wanted to basically talk about the industry of racism denialism and how that affects our ability to deal with these issues as we encounter them with AI. Is that a significant factor?
It is. I'm sure there's a joke about the Illuminati in there somewhere. But the reality is, yeah, there is there's always resistance to the status. There's always resistance in changing the status quo because it does destabilize power. It does shift some of the resources, et cetera. And we keep using the pie pie analogy. I'm not throwing away the pie. I'm just expanding the size of the pie. You can still have just as much if you just share a little bit more. But yeah, racism denial is a problem. And quite often when we get into these conversations, it is show me the data, and it winds up being there are volumes of data out there. You can go out to the AMA where it actually has a journal that talks about that. There's various bioethics councils for AI that are set up. Stanford has one, MIT has one, Harvard has them as well. The Center for Bioethics talks about it. There are various publications in PubMed, NCBI, NIST is working on standards when it comes to AI. These conversations are happening internationally as well, and the UK has been grappling with this a little bit more because of their use or their advanced use of facial recognition software. So what should we be doing when it comes to that? And same thing with smart cities, right? That's another area with urban planning that we're beginning to tackle with, because the cities have to get smarter to be sustainable. So when we're talking about accessibility, when we're talking about transport, when we're talking about access, and leveraging technology to let people come in and who we're denying, these questions are being asked and the data is out there. But even in academics, where if you're not taking on the humanities piece of this, if you're not really standing up and saying, hey, philosophically, can we have this conversation? These are moral issues, moral dilemmas. And you're just using just the data to try and craft a backward story. You're never going to get the whole picture. I mean, it winds up coming down to, it's the trolley dilemma, right? We're going to get the more and more autonomous vehicles out there, and these cars are going to have to make decisions. Who do they kill, right? Very uncomfortable conversation to have. Do we want to ensure that we've got the right people at that conversation or at that table? But also, it's one of those, well, if I have to make a decision, which one am I bringing my own biases to the table? But also, can I even see the Black person? I mean, really, these are some of the additional secondary and ancillary conversations that need to happen. I see a white person there, I see a Black person there, but because of the technology and systems, I can't actually see that other Black person there because I didn't think about it when I was developing the hardware so that it could see darker shades. And so all I see is a shadow. So instead of killing one person, I knew now kill two. Was that the right thing to do? So this is one of those areas where inclusion, not just diversity, but inclusion at the table at the beginning of the process, before we get into the decision makings, really has impact.
That is the scariest thing I've heard all day.
Yeah, I mean, well, and you've brought this up a couple of times with cameras. The fact is that film was developed to be most responsive and give best pictures when taking pictures of white people. And
Right.
that's something that has continued as we have benchmarked digital cameras against film, that kind of thing. So that's a bias that has been, built into the system for more than 100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So,
I just hate it when there's things like that I know. Mm-hmm. Like, I know that, like, the idea that self-driving cars wouldn't see a person of color versus me, a white woman, it's like I guess I mean, like, I knew that the technology had the biases in there already, but I didn't like put the two pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just one more example of, like you brought up, Alex, why you need to have people at the table from the get-go. Because like you can be it was like on my part, it's like a complete, no pun intended, like blindsided. Like I totally was not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So we have some pretty sober faces here in the booth. You've talked a little bit about what companies can do, what researchers need to focus on. Those of us sitting at home just with our jaws kind of dropped, what can we do about this?
Don't wait for the robot uprising to get activated on this topic. Your peers outside of the U.S. are having this conversation. You should too. Call and write your senators. I know that it seems that politically there's a bit of a deadlock, but I know back in 2018 there were a few senators, including Senator Harris, that was approached on this particular topic on how we deal with the legislation and regulations for AI. So write them, challenge the system. We should be working on active consent, right? So get educated on what that means and what that means to you, not just the people around you. And then also, we have a little bit of a roadmap when it comes to privacy, and that was GDPR. We should have something like that. Again, talk to your congresspeople, talk to your senators, get them thinking at least about that. I know it might seem like it's a waste of time, especially when you hear some of the conversations that people in the House, or some of the questions that the people in the House and Senate pose, people like Zuckerberg, etc. But don't let that throw you out. Don't throw you off. Don't be cynical about it. You still need to make sure that you get some level of digital representation. It's something that you need, and just get the conversation going.
All right. Thank you so much. We have been talking with Alix Jules. I'd like to thank our audience as well for tuning in to Atheists Talk. This is Stephanie Zavan, your host. Please join us again next Sunday. I'm proud to be on the air with Minnesota Atheists, and I hope that you appreciate the show. This show depends on the generous support of our members, our sponsors, and our donors. Please consider supporting the show through the donation link at minnesotaatheists.org. This is Atheists Talk on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Have a great Sunday.